Yep.
As teachers, a big part of our jobs includes meeting our students' educational and emotional needs. Whether it's identifying the need for an IEP for a student, securing in-school counseling when a student seems troubled, securing school supplies for a student whose family cannot afford the basic tool of education, or making sure a student has food to eat over the weekend because school is the only place they get a decent meal. Today's teachers are more than educators. They're expected to be advocates for their students and sometimes their families. In this episode of Five Star Review, Lauren and I, Narita Torrente, will discuss some of the challenges that impede teachers from effectively advocating for their students and solutions to aid teachers in championing for their students' needs. Let me make sure. Okay, yes. Okay, go ahead.
All right. Well, Narita, thank you for that wonderful intro. I mean, this is just such an important topic, I think, to consider, especially these days, right? So
Yes.
I think let's kick it off. Let's dive into, I mean, you mentioned a lot about some of the challenges that are impeding teachers from effectively advocating for their students. So
Yeah.
what are some of those challenges? I mean, what do you see as some of the primary ones?
So I will tell you, I was reading recently a article by Whitby, Marks, McIntyre, and Winkie, advocating for students with disabilities in the school at the school level, tips for special educators. They mentioned that special education teachers are known to face administrative pressures to act unethically in some situations. For example, they may be asked to recommend inexpensive or existing services for SPED students instead of more appropriate services that might not be readily available or have fiscal implications, or conducting fewer assessments than the special educator believes is necessary for the student to receive a comprehensive evaluation by law. Some of them are even being asked to limit the information provided to parents so that parents know what their parental due process rights are. You know, I think some of this has to do with current policy in place, or, you know, policies aren't addressing what's going on at the school level, at that local level, in terms of the administration staff having to deal with limited budgets, too many students, overcrowding, and not being able to have the resources to really adequately support a child. And as a teacher, you know, by nature, we are people who care for students. We enter this profession because we really care about students. We want to make sure that they're getting, you know, that they have the access to the optimal learning environment. And so what that does, it pits teachers against the administration so that they're at odds with the administration and they feel they're going counter to their jobs. So I think that environment, that reality, I think sometimes makes it very hard for teachers to actually advocate appropriately for their kids. And what do you think? What are your thoughts on that?
Narita, that is just an excellent question. And a lot of what you said really resonated with some thoughts that I've had as well. You know, one of the things you said that I was really reflecting on throughout the readings and the coursework that we've been doing is, you know, that excellent guest presentation that we had from Giselle Brown, where she was talking about this issue of special education students. And one of the things she said that stuck out to me was the fact that classroom teachers who have these students the majority of the time have no special education training. Whereas the specialists who do have that training are kind of merely helpers and are on the side. And so the students aren't getting the full benefit, you know, of a teacher who actually knows kind of how to meet their needs. And I think the question is kind of why is that happening and what can we do to fix it? I think some of it is, you know, you mentioned administrators. Well, you know, I think it's this focus on, you know, the product versus the purpose. And, you know, are we trying to meet every single student's need and try to get them, you know, to the maximum capabilities that they have as a student, or are we focusing more on the product? You know, I think of like testing and the test scores and the overall grade being given a school, or, you know, or even being given to an administrator, you know, and they are under the pressure to perform, you know, and so they almost are are finding ways to deal with the special education accommodations versus actually thinking about those students.
So tell me, what policy solutions do you think could be enacted to help teachers advocate appropriately for their students' education needs?
Right? I mean, because that's the question. I mean, we can point out the problems all day, but what can we do about it? Yeah, I really think that one of the policies that would potentially make sense is looking truly at, okay, so if we're talking about students who are in need of accommodations, looking at what policies are in place for who is qualified to be their teacher. And is that the kind of thing where we want to, make more requirements for all classroom teachers in that regard, or just make it to where, we're having a little more guidance over who's actually supervising that. I think that would be one policy. I think there's a lot that could be said about, what are we requiring? How are we measuring success? As teachers, as educators, big policy picture, sitting down and saying, how are we going to measure success? And I get it. It has to be something that is measurable. But is what we have going on right now truly doing that? And is it truly to the best interest of our students? What do you think? I mean, have you had any thoughts about policy?
Well, when you kind of made me think about, I think you were alluding to the Common Core and how the expectation is that all graduates will be able to meet those standards. And I think because we've been so focused on this question of equitable education, it's not so much that it's equitable, that the education itself is equitable, it's the access to education and the education that's right for kids. So I think that's going to be a harder solution to solve, because I think that's going to take to do that kind of personalized education across the board takes a lot of resources, a lot of funding. I mean, the education system, we can talk about how there's just not enough resources and money right now to fund that. But in terms of immediate policy solution, I think schools could benefit from an independent advocacy board, someone that's a group that's not with the administration, that's not with the teachers, almost like a check and balance system, where you go before this board to sort of advocate for what resources are needed, because I think in some ways administrators, they are very much looking at the bottom line for the school. They're looking at, how that impacts their performance, their maybe even career aspirations. And I hate to be cynical like that, but I almost feel like having an independent advocacy board to sort of come and sort of assess, help the teacher comes up with the possible solution and assess with the teachers what resources there are that are independent from an administrative.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, this goes even into the broader question, which is, how can we come alongside families and support them? I think especially in this day and age, where so many students right now are learning from home, and we're trying to equalize everything for every student. We're hearing these stories of, second graders essentially being left to try to navigate online school on their own. And I think the question then becomes like, how do we advocate for those students by coming alongside their families? And how do we integrate families more into, what we are doing? Because I think that's another thing that could help with this.
Yeah, and I think part of that access is also training those families that are not comfortable and familiar with online in the digital realm, to get them trained up to the basics, because they are their children's, in many cases, they're their children's support if they're there in the home. So yeah, again, challenges upon challenges that we couldn't have even predicted.
But what do you think about, is awareness of these kind of education related issues, emotional distress, economic situations. How much of this is the teacher's responsibility, or, are we just kind of grasping for the stars, and we can't ever really truly get there?
Well, I don't know. I think it depends. I think there needs to be more training. I know that I'm not always the most empathetic person. Sometimes I don't take the time really. I'm, trying to teach. You're so focused on getting that lesson plan out, trying to make sure the outcomes, and dealing with disruptions, or, it becomes hard to sort of see what's going on in the classroom. But then I think of Lisa Godwin's 2019 TED Talk, which I actually wrote my blog about, where she shared about the relationship she had with her first grade teacher, and how she sensed that her quiet, timid nature was really more a sign of something amiss in her personal life. She talked about how she was sexually abused at the home, and this had an impact in terms of her readiness to learn. And this teacher sensed it, made an effort to get her some school counseling, where she eventually opened up to the problem.
Yeah.
And it made a difference in her life.
What a huge, yeah.
I'd say the one solution I would have for this, in terms of what solutions can help teachers address non-educational issues that impede learning, is to make that training part of the a teacher's continuing education credits for licensure. Because I think as teachers, our learning is lifelong, but it's not just our learning in our content area that we need to keep learning. We need to keep learning about students. We need to keep learning about the students we're teaching and how to deal with them emotionally, how to identify signs of stress in a child. Why are they not ready to learn? Because it all impacts the child holistically.
Yeah.
So,
and that's a huge burden, when you look at, can I do that for, 60, 80, 100 kids? And I think that goes to the training, and talk about teaching being a calling, not just a career. I mean, I think it all goes to that. One of the articles I looked at talked about how teachers are truly essential workers, and that if we've learned anything over the last 6 months, it's how essential they are. And we are the eyes on these students to kind of have that temperature check of where are they at emotionally, socially, like you referenced way back at the beginning, are they getting enough food? The school is so much more than just addition and subtraction and learning to read for these students. And so it needs to be that for the teachers as well.
Yes.
Yeah. Good.
So any closing thoughts before we wrap up this episode of 5-Star Review?
Other than feeling like, the daunting task of how can I do this all? I think teachers right now are faced with the challenge of kind of shifting and expanding roles. And I think that's exciting though. I think there's so much potential to be like the teacher you were referencing, to be life-changing and for a student. And I think that's exciting. How about you? Any closing thoughts for you?
I think the one thing is that it's a very exciting period to be in education. I mean, there's an opportunity to reinvent what education is. I think everyone talks about going back to normal, but I don't think we should go back to normal. I think we should go back to better, and
yes,
my big concern is, of course, right now, the disparities that I'm seeing in children with the access to online learning. And it breaks my heart to think that, now there's more kids who are shut out of this.
Yeah.
So,
but hopefully it can be our call to do better. If it raises awareness of the issue so that we can fix it, I think we just need to keep our eyes on it and not forget until it's better.
That's true. Well, Lauren, thank you so much. As always, it's great chatting with you. Until next time.
Until next time. All righty.